Hi, this is Carl Leopson at the University of Arizona, and I wanted to give you a quick walkthrough of the history of special education law, kind of to go along with the article we're reading for class. Just to bring some things to your attention that I found important in the article. One is that you need to understand that the 10th Amendment gives each state the responsibility of education. The responsibility for education is not the federal government's. So all children are not guaranteed a right to a free education under the Constitution. It's actually under state constitutions that education is enacted in law. And that becomes important in the development of special education law. One thing that happened early in education was states passing compulsory education laws. And since states were responsible individually and not the federal government, they passed those laws themselves. And so Rhode Island was the first law, Massachusetts was the second, and by 1918 all the states that were around had compulsory education laws. It means kids had to go to school by law. Now, that was true, but not necessarily for everyone. Kids with disabilities were still excluded, and in fact, there were legal cases in the courts excluding kids with disabilities, that they were too disruptive in class, that they got in the way, stating they actually were disruptive because they drooled on themselves too much. Kids with disabilities were not generally included in early schooling. But it's really interesting to see that in 1910 there was a conference held called the White House Conference, in which leadership from around the country in education and in law got together to come up and establish and define remedial programs for children with disabilities or special needs. That had a kind of a short life. It wasn't enacted for very long. 1954. We know about Brown versus Board of Education, guaranteeing a free or an appropriate and equal right to education under the law. Kind of a first federal push into education to guarantee some kind of rights of education, where segregation was banned from school, but for people of color, not for children with disabilities. And in fact, it was that early civil rights push that started the ball rolling for kids with disabilities. And in part, it was groups, or advocacy groups, like in 1972, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, that brought a class action suit against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because the state was delaying or ignoring the education of students with disabilities. Basically, they said we need to include our kids with disabilities in classes in Pennsylvania. And not only was it advocacy groups, professionals, academics, teachers, but it was also parents. So in some cases, in the late 60s, early 70s, parents brought cases to court on behalf of kids with disabilities, like Mills versus the Board of Education. So the story is one of action by advocacy groups and action really by parents in the late 60s and early 70s. In 1973, Congress jumped into the act and passed Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, further guaranteeing open access to structures and to organizations that received federal funding. Then finally, in 1975, Gerald Ford signed into act the EAHCA, Education for All Handicapped Children Act, that has since been renamed, as we know it now, to be IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it does have as its centerpiece, as we'll learn, the IEP, or the Individualized Education Program. And we're going to learn how to write one of those in class. Parental groups have kept up their efforts, and other advocacy groups have kept up their efforts. I'm a member of advocacy groups like CEC, Council for Exceptional Children, and its subdivisions. If you're going to be a special education teacher, you should consider doing the same. It's in our numbers in these groups that we're really able to have an effect. And you can join cheap while you're still a student. Now, IDEA has been amended several times to include a number of things. These are just a couple of the examples of amendments in 1990 and 1997. There were also amendments to include early childhood programs, but there's also been an emphasis on person-first language, autism, traumatic brain injury, and planning for the transition needs of kids. One thing we'll do in this class is learn to write a transition plan. Really critical. We have come a long way in serving the needs of kids with disabilities, but there's really a long way to go. In this class, one of the things we'll learn is where we're at now in terms of law and procedure in special education, but also where things are about to go in the future and some of the laws that are coming up soon. All right. This is Carl Leopson, University of Arizona, and I'll see you again online.